Hello, welcome back to Blender Sushi Live Noding. In this episode, I'm going to do improvisation of a new node in Sverchok. It's called the empty node, and empty node is always kind of interesting for me because it's almost like empty. If you like creating empty manually here, an empty object is something that will not render, but empty object has a transformation value like location, rotation, and scale. So you can actually scale the empty. You can rotate it. So it's almost like a transform matrix, but it is also feasible in the 3D, and you can actually kind of like generate instance based on you can actually have like a group objects, and if you set this empty duplications into group, you can have like Suzanne. Let me zero it out. So that's like an instance of Suzanne from an empty. So that's if you are doing it manually. Now let's have a look at the new empty nodes inside Sverchok. I will create outliner here. I'm gonna save this as improv empty 001, and the node is called exactly empty out. So by default, if you create this empty out nodes, you will see right away, you can see an empty inside on the 3D scenes, and there's nothing much on this empty nodes actually. I think this is something that can grow. I kind of expect that this empty node also being able to maybe change the view into different object, like empty objects. You can be like a cone, single arrow, or like an axis. I actually like this arrow. It's almost like a invisible particle. So like I said, this is like something that represents like a transform. So you can move around this empty, and then by default, it's really just acting like a normal empty objects in Blender. You can rotate it, etc. And the way it works, like if you create like a vector value, for example, using vector in, and you plug this into the matrix, it's gonna reset itself to 0, 0, 0, because by default this is 0, 0, 0, and you can move it in X, in Y, in Z. So that's actually pretty normal and pretty simple. And you can see the color, actually vector going into blue, orange into blue, is actually just a convenience that you have inside Sverchok. In reality, if you want to do it like a more detailed works, you want to use a matrix in, and you plug in the vector into location or scale or rotation, and you plug the matrix into this guy right here, and that way you're gonna control the objects, which is just an empty object. And this empty is actually quite interesting because it's unlike other nodes in Sverchok. Normally, if you have like a box object, and then you connect it to a viewer draw, and then you use like a random vector, you create like 5 random vector, you plug this into the matrix, and it's kind of like a spawning like that. With this current nodes, empty nodes, it doesn't actually do that. So you can't just plug in multiple value into the matrix. You can see there's like a multiple value here, but that's not something that's being used. We don't have 5 empty here, only 1 empty. So that's the current behavior. It might change in the future, but this with this 5 value, or let me make it like a 25 value. Now we have like 25 matrix transform for the empty. You can actually use like a list item and just scrub through and then going through every empty. So that can be useful for animations, of course. What else interesting is that of course you can do like rotations and things like that. So go back to this matrix in. For the rotations, by default it's 0, 0, 1, which is the Z-axis for rotation. So you can actually rotate it using frame, something like that. See, it's rotating. It's actually, I think it's degree by default. You can increase the speed or decrease it. So that's possible. So with an empty, you can definitely like create a bunch of objects and do like a normal parenting. So select this empty, Control P. The funny thing with Blender, interesting, is that you can parent to objects or parent to objects with a keep transform. If I select the first one, it's gonna be parented, but then, oh, okay, the behavior is kind of similar. I think they're actually kind of different. So anyway, that's two objects being parented, and then they're rotating because of these empty objects. But we can also do the same if we have like this box object, and I'm gonna scale it. So we have like 25 box objects, and I'm gonna use a viewer B mesh, and just gonna create this 25 objects. The cool thing is that you can use object set and then set this to parent. So this is our objects. We can actually parent it into our empty. So that's pretty cool. I wonder if this random value can work. So not really. So only a single object currently rotating. You can still adjust the positions here. Sometimes with empty, there's a you want to be able to kind of move this thing around, but if you have like a value already plugged into the location, it's gonna reset itself into these positions. Just keep that in mind. So rotating is rotating objects, rotating bunch of objects is now like much easier this way, using like a parenting. Here you can control the motion procedurally. For example, you can use like a vector noise and just plug in this guy into the noise, and also plug this into the frame, and you can see that it's kind of doing a interesting motion. So that's a quick way, like to do some kind of like a wiggle motion. You can also plug this into the rotations, and then it's gonna rotate like a bit crazy. If you actually want to have like an empty that's kind of spawning very easily, Sverchok actually provide this as a script node, and it's called empties out. So this one is pretty cool. I like this. Let's say I'm using vector P field, plug this into the matrices, and let's make like 5 by 5 by 5, 125 empty. You can randomize it, you can resize it, whatever. You can even you can move it. This is pretty easy to do using nodes. So that's like a different kind of empty. This empty is actually gonna spawn very easily. So that's if you want to that kind of behavior. So yeah, that's a quick look at Sverchok empty. Hopefully this is useful, and be careful if you make too many empties. There's like a lot of objects in the scenes. That's something to keep in mind. Blender doesn't like hundreds or thousands of objects in the scene, so that's not be careful with too many empty. Anyhow, it's better if you kind of use an instance of empty, maybe. So anyhow, and then a lot of empty. I'm gonna try deleting it, and then respawn, and still this is what's important for now, basically the new empty. And also you can do this if you actually make two empty with the same name, it's gonna respawn itself, and each one is like a master in itself. So they are not like you cannot control them at the same time. So let's see, if I name it A, B, C, they are kind of like a single. Each one of them is single, and if you want to control them, you have like a multiple vector in. So that's very, very important. It's actually a good study if you ever want to learn like a Sverchok from the very basics. Try to understand this matrix transformation first, and how you can, create this nice matrix value that you can use for an empty. That's actually a good starting point, I guess. And yeah, and then try randomizing the position. Try like use a vector noise to kind of make this kind of wiggly motion. That's a good starting point anyhow. So that's a new empty node in Sverchok. Let's see, we might use this again in near future. So yeah, hopefully this is useful. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.